of these items on the table look familiar to you? How many of you have been hit by one of these by your parents in your lifetime? Do you remember how it made you guys feel? Well, I remember this all too well. The emotional and physical pain, the confusion and fear instilled in me is something I'll never forget. Spanking is a very controversial subject these days, and many of us have our own definition of what spanking really is, and because of that, it's so easy for a parent to cross a line. Sadly, this has led to a lot of pain and suffering in many children. If you're a parent, you know all too well that parenting is a very difficult task, one of the most challenging things anyone will ever encounter. The reason I want to talk to you today about spanking is because a lot of people do not realize the harmful effects it has on our children. It not only leads to negative physical consequences, but emotional, mental, and behavior consequences as well. I will discuss with you the definition of spanking versus discipline, a few of the long-term negative effects spanking has on our children's brain, and lastly, some alternative positive parenting methods to discipline your child. So, let's define spanking. It's defined as to strike a person, usually a child, with an open hand, especially on the buttocks, for punishment. Well, what is punishment? It's defined as a severe, rough handling of treatment. Does this sound as though it's something positive and a growth for our children? We ultimately want to discipline our children to teach them right from wrong. Discipline comes from the word disciple, which means to teach. But it's really important to consider what discipline methods we're teaching our children. Someone may hit you, and most of us will stop what we're doing, but that doesn't mean we've learned why somebody did it or what we should be doing instead. It's very confusing for a child to process all of this because they're young. They're developing their little brains, okay? And they don't understand like we do as adults. This leads me to my next point of what spanking does to your children. Spanking can lead to many negative effects on your child's brain long term. It immediately instills fear in the child. While spanking may get that immediate response you want, the long-term consequences may not be what we're hoping for. Spanking teaches a child to be fearful of parents rather than teaching the child to consider their behavior and take responsibility for their actions. According to Hand in Hand Learning, when a child is hit, the part of the brain for learning and understanding go into alarm mode. His body becomes reactive and they're unable to learn anything. The prefrontal cortex center of reasoning and judgment shut down. The control that the parent is striving for has everything to do with fear and nothing to do with teaching, learning, or a child's understanding of concept of right or wrong. When a child is in fear, they cannot think rationally or make good decisions. It has been proven through years of study, the best and most effective parents are connected to their children. But if they're afraid of you, it's really hard for them to connect with you. Another effect is that it can make them act out aggressively. Spanking sends the wrong message to a child. It communicates that hitting or being aggressive is an appropriate response to a problem. According to CBS News by Michelle Castillo, there was a study done, 1,900 families in 20 U.S. cities, and they were asked how often they spanked their children. When he or she was age 3 and 5, and a child's aggressive behavior and vocabulary were assessed at 3 and 9. And a total of 57% of mothers and 40% of fathers spanked their child at the age of 3. When the child was 5, 52% of mothers and 33% of fathers spanked their children. Mothers who were still spanking their child at the age of 5, no matter how often, were more likely to have a child who was more aggressive than his or her peers by the time they were 9. Mothers who spanked their child at least twice a week when they were 3 also had children who more likely to have these behavioral problems as well. Numerous studies have shown that earlier abuse and neglect had a greater impact on development than later abuse and neglect. When you use spanking as a discipline method, you are sending the message that big people can hit little people. And that's the way to resolve problems. If you spank your child when you're angry, you're modeling that when you're angry, it's okay to hit. You have to remember that they're not adults. They are growing children learning in this crazy world. And how hypocritical of it is to model that aggressive behavior, yet expect our kids to do the exact opposite. I believe showing the next generation how to manage rage without violence is such a lifelong critical skill that we all should teach them. The next long-term effect spanking has is that it can lower IQ scores. Gray matter is an important part of the central nervous system. It influences intelligent testing and learning abilities. It includes areas of the brain that's involved in sensory perception, speech, muscular control, emotions, and in memory. The more gray matter you have in a decision-making, thought processing part of the brain, the better your ability to evaluate rewards and consequences. It was proven that children who were regularly spanked had less gray matter in certain areas of that brain. According to the National Institute of Health, After studies were done, they found exposing children to harsh corporal punishment that had detrimental effects on the brain development. Harsh corporal punishment in the study was defined as at least one spanking a month for at least 3 years, frequently done with objects such as a spatula, a belt, or a sandal. The researchers also found significant correlations between the amount of gray matter in these brain regions and how well children performed on IQ tests. It was also shown that children were spanked at least twice a week by their fathers at the age of 5 were more likely to score low on vocabulary and language comprehension tests. But it's never too late to stop the vicious cycle, and this leads me to my last point. Thanks to a lot of research gathered over many years, we have learned there are more beneficial ways to discipline in a positive, effective manner. Since 1979, more than 30 other countries have banned corporal punishment at homes and in schools. Yet it remains legal for a parent to spank their child in the U.S. But we can change that with just a few ways of learning to discipline our children in a positive way. According to FamilyResources.com by Catherine K. Bowles, when you take time for yourself, you can come up with more logical consequences. Parents are more prone to use spanking when they haven't had any time for themselves. They feel depleted and hurried, so it's important to de-stress by working out, by praying, by walking. Consequences that are logically related to behavior help teach children responsibility. For example, your child breaks a neighbor's window. Why spank them? What does he learn about the situation? He may learn to never do it again, but he also learns that he needs to hide his mistakes, put the blame on somebody else, or simply try to not get caught the next time. Try to have him go to the neighbor, help him fix the window, be responsible. Also, you could be kind and firm in action. Another solution, get on your child's level, look him in the eyes, and with a firm voice, request what you need from them. Another solution, withdraw from conflict. Children who sass back tend to make parents feel provoked to hit them. It's best if you withdraw from the situation immediately. Do not leave the room in anger. Calmly say you'll be in the next room when you're ready to talk to me respectfully, and think of those consequences that you can, appropriate consequences for their disrespectful behavior. And lastly, give choices. Give your child a choice is an effective alternative. If she's playing with her food, ask her, would she like to stop playing with her food, or you can get down and go to your room. If she continues, follow through with the consequence. Firmly but kindly take her down and send her on her way. These are just some of the methods that you can use instead of spanking. It works. It takes so much time and so much patience, but it's worth it. I know it's not easy to change cultural attitude towards corporal punishment. However, over the last few decades, it has shown more and more parents do not believe in spanking. It's important to understand that we have a lot of more information than we had even 5 years ago about the brain and how it works. Spanking leads to so many long-term damaging effects on our children, such as instilling fear, promoting aggression, and lowering IQ scores. There's not only one way to discipline your child, and with incorporating positive disciplines such as being kind and firm in action, withdrawing from conflict, and giving choices, you are allowing their trust, love, and respect to be built, while teaching them lessons, creating a more healthy life and future for you and your child. Do you want to raise your aggressive, low self-esteem, impatient young adult? Let's not allow ourselves to continue the destructive cycle we've been doing for years, justifying because your parents hit you and you turned out okay, it's okay to hit your children. Let's lead with positivity and patience and not quick repercussions of anger and stress. Let's be the change to raise physically, emotionally, and mentally young adults who are confident, patient, kind, and loving, respectful beings. I urge you to all reevaluate and reconsider your position. And I ask you, just think about it. Would you want to have a child who behaves because he fears you or because he respects you? Thanks.